couple of the terms that got tossed around in the forums and then in the readings are intelligent design and theistic evolution. And there are a couple differences between these two views. I just wanted to help clarify for those of you who are asking about it. The big deal here comes down to a question about if God's using evolutionary processes to create and to move creation forward. Is there design behind it? And this is a tough question because there are indicators in the biology that we have and in the way that we look at the world that suggest that everything's not as perfect as you might expect if you had like a really competent architect designing something. In fact, a lot of the things, the systems that we see in biology tend to look as if they were if there was some randomness in the process, right? And so we have things like vestigial organs in human beings, organs that may or at one time have served a purpose but no longer do, or maybe never even served a purpose at all, and yet they're in our DNA and they grow into us. And if you're thinking about how those things came about, well, one question is if perhaps there was some randomness to it. It wasn't as perfectly designed as you might expect if your image of God is like a watchmaker who's like meticulously figuring out every detail, because it looks like that's that doesn't look exactly like what we see from just like purely an observational perspective. Well, this is one of the issues that theistic evolutionists have with intelligent design proponents, because intelligent design proponents kind of say, well, it might be an evolutionary process, but at each stage of the process, God is sort of superintending every sort of change that's made, right? And so it's like rather than God simply speaking the world into creation or speaking the world into being ex nihilo from nothing, God sort of does it like 1 second at a time, and then when we sort of look back at that, that looks like evolution to us. But in fact, it was cleverly and perfectly designed every step of the way. There wasn't really any randomness. There wasn't really any chaos, or there wasn't any generativity really from the created order itself. It's all the work of a designer. Theistic evolutionists have a problem with that because they have the observations that I just mentioned. And yet, theistic evolutionists do want to agree that there is some general design. There are some basic parameters to the universe that kind of push creation in certain directions rather than others. And let me give an example of what that means. In evolutionary theory, there's a process that has been called convergence, right? And what convergence is if you trace the skeletons and fossils of various creatures and look at their DNA. Well, if you take like an insect, like a fly, right, and you look at the fly's DNA, well, it doesn't have very much in common with, for example, say the DNA of a bat, okay? And yet both insects and bats are able to fly. The idea of convergence isn't it interesting that, evolutionary processes were happening according to this theory, like they're going, and it's going, and a long series of processes show up in what we have as a fly now, and they've created wings that function in a pretty interesting way to make flight possible. And it's not just insects; it's like I said, bats. We have a number of flying, what we think of as dinosaurs. There's lots of different flying animals, and what's interesting is the kind of light, leathery, feathery wing and the structure of the bones that hold the wing and give it stability look very similar. It's as if evolutionary processes found a similar solution to a problem, namely I need to fly, and evolutionary processes totally unrelated, because remember, insects, bats, flying dinosaurs, they're not related DNA-wise. They don't have common ancestors, common history. So according to evolutionary theory, they evolved independently, and yet they exhibit some very similar apparatuses and that look as if they were designed. They look like they came about in a very particular way. And so it's very interesting. So theistic evolutionists want to look at that and say, well, we need to make something out of that. this idea of convergence, that the universe is set up in such a way that and the laws of physics are set up in such a way that as the universe is itself creative, with the creator spirit of God, as that's happening, some similar solutions to common problems will inevitably come up. And we look at that and we can say there is a kind of design to that. But that is a much different kind of design than what you get when you're talking about with intelligent design folks who are talking about a very meticulous process that God's involved in step by step of the way. So that's a little bit, hopefully that can help get a distinction in between what's going on with evolutionary creationism or theistic evolution, however you want to call it, and ID, because they are different, and they have a lot of similarities, but that is one major difference, and hopefully that gives you a little sense of that.